Hello! My name is Nyan, and I'm your host for the first episode of Graveyard Gaming, a show where we reminisce about video game franchises that have been long abandoned by their developers or publishers. In these episodes, there will be 4 main sections, and since this is the first episode, I'd like to go over them. First, we'll start with a funeral. What did the release timeline look like for the series? Were there any cancelled projects? And what was the developer's strategy for success? After that, we'll move on to an autopsy report. What caused the franchise to die, or at the very least, what was the most likely reason? Next up is a celebration of life, where I explain what made these games so good when they were released, and why you might want to pay a visit to their dusty graves. And at the very end will be the resurrection section. How do you go about playing these games in the modern era? And for episodes documenting online games, how do we get these experiences back in the hands of gamers? But with that all out of the way, I just want to warmly welcome all of you to the first episode of this series. Well, as warm as my reanimated dead body can at least. Anyways, you guys all remember SAO, right? It's Sword Art Online for the people in the back. Now imagine it as a Linkin Park music video. And that's how you get Baroque, basically. Baroque was clearly an action RPG that was just way too ahead of its time. If it was released as an indie game these days, it would probably become a cult classic very quickly, with game theory videos and Hot Topic merch. And I'm honestly kind of pissed I even came up with that idea, because Baroque Hot Topic merch would be sick. What? There was a sale! But after all, if that was Baroque's case, then I wouldn't be here, would I? Instead, this video would be titled, How Baroque Became an Emo Icon in 2009. I'll tell you what caused the death of the franchise, cause I know you're probably just dying to know, but first, I'm sure most of you watching have never even heard of this game. Baroque is a roguelike action RPG with a heavy emphasis on Christian symbolism and a critique of the concept of original sin, where you fight ugly monsters and randomly generated floors underground to atone for your sins. And no, I'm not talking about the Binding of Isaac. This concept clearly proved to be popular with some adjustments, which makes me believe this franchise mostly died because of a lack of interest at the time for this kind of game. On November 22nd, 1994, Sega released the Sega Saturn in Japan. On December 3rd that same year, Sony would release the PlayStation. 2 years later, sometime in 1996, developer Sting would start working on a 3D first-person roguelike action RPG with permadeath for the Sega Saturn. Now that probably sounds like any weeaboo's wet dream, second to maybe something I can't say on YouTube. The game would use scale models for sprites to be used as the enemies and NPCs, just like Doom. Here are a couple. I think they're really cool, and honestly it'd be a disservice to the video if I didn't show them to you. I just love stop motion in video games like this, and overall just old techniques people used to use to make sprites in video games, and chances are you do too, cause you clicked on my stupid video. Another 2 years would pass, and Sting would finally give birth to our dearly beloved Baroque on May 21st, 1998 for the Sega Saturn. But this release would only cover Japanese regions. However, Sega would release their next console, the Dreamcast, half a year later on November 27th, 1998. This was obviously not good news for Sting. I mean, would you buy a game for a dying console? Since the Dreamcast didn't have backwards compatibility, this was the first major struggle that Baroque had. And to make matters worse, it would become a terrible curse for the series, always missing the mark on release schedules. Baroque would also get a port for the PlayStation on October 28th, 1999, once again, only in Japan. And also, once again, to become obsolete, since the same curse would strike again. The PlayStation 2 would release almost half a year later on March 4th, 2000. But arguably, this wouldn't kill sales since the PS2 was backwards compatible, but there's no contesting that the game definitely didn't sell as well as it could have if it were released on the new shiny next-gen consoles. Now, Japan is pretty big with their flip phone games and PC shareware, and this trend really helped get business going in the 2000s since it was still all cutting-edge tech that Japanese consumers were jumping all in on. This was the very beginning of casual gaming in Japan as we know it. And with all the free MMOs and mobile games out there now, not much has really changed. Anyways, the entertainment industry in Japan was seeing green as these companies could just make a quick minigame and use it as an advertisement for the real game they were trying to sell on home consoles. This practice was made even easier by the fact that these games would often use graphics from the real game. Essentially, these devs would make a fun skeleton minigame and then figure out how to brand it in a way that makes the player feel like they're getting a massively inferior experience to the actual game. Subconsciously, this would cause the player to want the real game, even if they weren't especially interested to begin with. It's that FOMO shit, you've heard about it. Thankfully, in the age of digital media and the internet, game devs typically stick to releasing a demo to entice players instead. Anyways, back to Baroque. Typing of the Baroque was the first of these to release, and it would release on May 22nd, 2000 as a PC shareware typing game with gameplay similar to Typing of the Dead, along with its name clearly referencing the Dreamcast classic. This would be followed by Baroque Shooting on July 17th, 2000. This one is actually really good. It surprised me quite a bit. It's a solid shareware Toho clone for PC. And to any Toho fans out there, or just bullet hell enjoyers in general, I'll leave a link in the description to download this one, as you should really check it out. It's nothing to rival Toho, but it's really fun and it's free, so might as well, right? The third of these shareware games would be Baroque Syndrome, to be released on July 27th, 2000. It would even get a PS1 port, but only for Japanese soil. This game is also entirely in Japanese, which normally isn't a problem for gamers, but since it's a visual novel, unfortunately reading is all you really can do in this game. Well, this marks a turn in the series. The animeification of Baroque, if you will. From now on, the game had a clear anime influence, and this visual novel is actually a retelling of the Baroque manga, which does have a fan translation floating around if you had any interest in reading it. I can't link it for obvious reasons, but it's out of print, so I doubt Sting would be knocking at your door for reading it online for free. Around that same time, they'd release other shareware PC games and ports of those games for mobile. They're all considered lost media, but I can show you some advertisements for them. Here's Baroque Maniac Quiz. It seems pretty straightforward, maybe just a game that would quiz you on lore or mechanics, featuring this funny guy that I'll talk about later, goddammit. Baroque Darts, again, very self-explained title, just darts simulator for PC and mobile. Darts is huge in Japan, by the way, so if you've ever wondered why there are so many shitty darts games that are themed based off of anime or popular Japanese games, that's why. The last of the series of minigames would be Baroque Suijaku. Now this game doesn't have a lot of info, but it seems to be a puzzle game of sorts. And looking up Suijaku did not really help clear up anything. Apparently, the name comes from Honji Suijaku, which is a theory that all kami are speaking natively as Buddhist deities? I'm not sure. And I'm not a religion guy, so if anyone in the comments can tell me what Suijaku means, I'd be very happy. Anyways, now that all the lame shit's out of the way, on March 8th, 2001, Sting would make the easy decision to discount Baroque for the PS1. This was ultimately a sign of failure for most game developers, and I'm surprised the franchise didn't just up and die right here. But clearly, Sting believed in Baroque, but it doesn't mean that they really knew what they wanted Baroque to be. As in 2005, a Japanese internet gaming forum called Dengeki Online would write a news article reporting the next release of Baroque from Sting to be a quote-unquote online game version of the PlayStation software Baroque. Of course, that's a Firefox translation, but there aren't any other details revealed about the game, other than the fact that it was planned to be released anytime between September 2005 to September 2006. With what we're given, I can only assume that this started as a straight-up PC port, and then the developers really enjoyed experimenting with LAN multiplayer, something that the PS1 was a bit difficult to program for and get working. This likely prompted development to shift towards an MMO rendition of Baroque, since MMOs were picking up speed in 2005, especially in Japan. But obviously, things didn't go that smooth, as this article is all we really have to prove the existence of this game. As fate would have it, Baroque Online would never release, and neither would a PC port of Baroque. It is worth noting, however, that around this time, Sting would also release avatars for the PC program Worlds. Worlds, if you're out of the loop, was a 90s virtual social platform. Think like VRChat or Roblox. But next year would spell an opportunity for the team, but not before another huge fumble. You see, in the background, the team was working on a port for Baroque that would release on the PS2. This would become yet another hurdle for the team, as in 2006, Sony released their next console, the PS3, on November 11th. That same year, a month later, on December 2nd, Nintendo would release the Wii. This will become relevant soon, so keep it in your skull. Baroque would eventually receive its remake for the PlayStation 2 on June 28th, 2007. Once again, only for Japan. This remake was plagued the exact same way the original was. Baroque released way too late in the PS2's life cycle. Thankfully, early PlayStation 3s in Japan were backwards compatible, but the next and more affordable PlayStation 3 Slim would release in 2009, rendering Baroque on PS2 pretty much obsolete for all PS3 owners past that date. And bro, I lived through this era. Everyone had a Slim. I don't know a single person that actually coughed up the cash for an OG PS3. Those fuckers were like $600. All my friends had a 360 until the Slim came out. I think the only person I knew who actually had an OG PS3 with the PS2 backwards compatibility and everything was my dad. And that's just because he was able to convince my mom that it was a good purchase because it had a Blu-ray player. Teenagers don't give a fuck about Blu-ray players. So, smart play, Sony. Oh wait, what were we talking about again? Oh yeah, Baroque. Baroque for the PS2 marked a turning point in the series. This remake was more of a reinstatement of what the original was trying to be, since the original was a little up to interpretation. The remake introduces anime cutscenes that make me really wish that an anime adaptation was conceived. The remake also includes 3D models of all the characters and items, and they look fantastic, with a little bit of censorship here and there. You see, some of the monsters from the original game were actually full-on naked, and I'm not going to show that here, but that's the reason why they were redesigned. The game also includes a third-person mode and better camera controls, which means that we can finally see the player character, who looks strikingly similar to the protagonist of Persona 3, which isn't too surprising since Sting would be working with Atlus to publish this one. There are also a multitude of quality of life features, including a difficulty setting, making this one the preferred version to play by anyone who isn't just playing for the novelty of a first-person PS1 roguelike. Sony would later announce a system for the PlayStation 3 and PSP called PlayStation 1 Classics, where you could buy PlayStation 1 games and emulate them on your PS3 or PSP through official means, kinda like Nintendo's Virtual Console. Remember when you didn't have to rent retro games? Anyways, Baroque was released to PlayStation 1 Classics on December 26, 2007, but only for Japanese regions. Baroque Syndrome was also released to PlayStation Classics on February 27, 2008, again, exclusive to Japan. These versions would also make it to the PlayStation Vita when that console came out, since all PlayStation 1 Classics were ported to the Vita. So yeah, add that one to the list of obscure Vita RPGs. This thing's a beast for that niche. The same year, on March 13th, 2008, Baroque would get another port, this time for Wii, titled Baroque for Wii. I know, really good stuff here. This version included dreaded motion controls that were required to attack. You see, this was a weird time in gaming, where an entire console's library required you to jerk it in order to play. And to make matters worse, the console was literally called the Wii. Like, Wii?
Honey, it's time for dinner.
Shut up, Mom, I'm jerking my Wii. But thankfully, this would actually turn out to be the definitive version of this game for those who liked the remake, since you can just play with the classic controller, and it feels identical to the controls of the PS2 version. What? Did you actually think I was going to subject myself to this? This version, of course, also had the bonus of widescreen support, and yeah, I'm gonna be honest, for Baroque PS2 to release without even just a 16:9 stretch mode in 2007 is kinda nuts to me. On April 8th, 2008, the world would finally see the first international release of Baroque for the PS2 and Wii. Until now, it's been pretty impossible to find anything about what people thought about Baroque in Japan, for multiple reasons. First of all, I don't know enough Japanese to translate or search for this on my own, and translation tools didn't really help much. What? I'm a video essayist, not a journalist. Another reason is that the Japanese internet isn't very well archived, like, at all. The last reason is the worst. It really just wasn't popular. I know, surprise, surprise, but finding anything on this game written in English before this point is actually pretty much impossible to find. I was losing my mind. But thankfully, the international release would finally change that. I just want to highlight IGN's review that was posted on April 30th, 2008. Mostly because showing you any other reviews would just bog up this video, and I think this review in particular really describes how the public thought of this game when it released. Damon Hatfield had a lot of insightful takes in his review that explain why they chose a dreaded rating of mediocre for this game. Damon goes on in his interview to highlight the poor translation affecting the voice acting, poor interaction with NPCs, and shallow combat with the noticeable lack of blocking or a dodge button. I can agree with most of that, but here there are a couple of negatives cited that don't really add up in this review. One comment really stuck out to me. Visually, Baroque doesn't have much going for it. There are some cool twisted character designs, but the environments lack detail and there is a very narrow color spectrum. This game looks like a very early PlayStation 2 game. This is a kinda strange thing to say in a review of a port of a PlayStation 2 game where this would really normally be expected, right? He also writes that your hit points are tied to your vitality, and your vitality is constantly falling, meaning you can't take a second to relax. This reads kind of like a negative. which supports my theory that this game was too ahead of its time on release. Also, this guy's capping. I have relaxed many times in this game. You just have to press the pause button. Supporting my theory even more is this quote. There is certainly a breed of gamer out there that enjoys these roguelike adventures and aren't bothered by having their characters reset every time they die. These brave few may find Baroque to their liking, but most of us will wonder what we ever did to deserve this punishment. Now, there is a lot to unpack here. How he drew a line between roguelike enjoyers and the rest of gamers, but that comment calling this style of game punishment basically proves to me that at the time, Western reviewers kinda sucked at playing video games. Actually, maybe that's never changed. Either way, it's clear that review scores were impacted by the difficulty and concept of this game, which are both incredibly tame for this genre, honestly, especially these days. I mean, look at how popular Souls-like and roguelikes are these days. On June 24th, 2011, the iPhone 4 would release. This phone would significantly raise the bar for what was capable for mobile gaming, with multiple legendary mobile releases around this time, like Angry Birds, Cut the Rope, Doodle Jump, and Fruit Ninja. But on the other side of mobile gaming, game developers for consoles would try to maximize their profits for the mainstream by porting old games to mobile. Plants vs. Zombies, Call of Duty Zombies, and Need for Speed Shift would prove the abilities of the iPhones and iPads, but also prove lucrative for business. And if those examples weren't enough, Rockstar would go on to port nearly every single game under their belt to iOS, starting with GTA 3 in 2011. This began a new age of gaming. Jerking it to the Wii was so last year, now everyone was clutching their phone with a claw grip and getting carpal tunnel. In 2012, Baroque would be ported to iOS on December 28th. This version was based on the PS2 version, and I don't really have much to say about it, other than the rumor that there was a version of the app called Baroque FPS, with the camera locked to first person, and all the weapons were replaced with guns. Here's a reconstruction of what that might have looked like. On November 20th, 2014, Crossy Road would release on iOS and Android, and I promise that this becomes relevant. On January 12th, 2019, Baroque Syndrome would see a port for iOS and Android worldwide, although this version is noticeably missing language translations, making the worldwide release seem kind of pointless. But next year, 2022 would come, and so would Baroque for PlayStation 1. On Nintendo Switch. On November 12th, exclusively for Japan. But, you see, the Nintendo Switch hardware isn't region locked, so you can technically just buy it with a Japanese account and play it on any region of Switch, but unless you know any Japanese, you're probably not getting far. And the fact that this is the PlayStation 1 version of Baroque just simply running in an emulator kinda speaks volumes about how Sting feels about Baroque these days. They couldn't even be bothered with porting the source code of the remake. At this point, we can clearly see a pattern here that Sting doesn't believe in their game doing well overseas, since Baroque's PS2 and Wii versions ranked so poorly among critics. Baroque's remake only made it to platforms the game would never thrive on, and the assets for the remake would never see the light of a re-release, but surely that doesn't mean that these models will be reused for a completely unrelated Fever Dream spin-off asset flip mobile game, right? Right? The final nail in the coffin for Baroque was a strange one. An all-new original Baroque game for mobile with new gameplay and reused graphics from the remake. Remember Crossy Road? Yup, Baroque Become a Meta Being, released on January 24th, 2022 for iOS and Android internationally. And it's about as fun as it sounds. This is basically just a Crossy Road with a really weird skin on it. It's like Spencer's collaborated with Hipster Whale. There aren't even any original features or concepts that separate this game from Crossy Road. It's almost embarrassing, honestly, how shameless this just knocks off Crossy Road. Big winners, us Baroque fans, huh? Now, I'm sure it's easy to see how this franchise died and what went wrong, but there's maybe more to the story than you think. Now it's time to move on to the Autopsy. Autopsy Report. First of all, in order for a game series to be alive, there must be mainline sequels that are regularly released, or the game has to have some sort of modern port like a remake or a remaster. But the most recent game in the Baroque series is a quiet release asset swap mobile game that was released 3 years ago, and I think that's proof that the series is pretty much dead. Okay, so cause of death. We have a couple of reasons floating around. But first I'd like to start with the elephant in the room. Release cycles. Oh my god, release cycles. I don't know what was going on there over at Sting for them to consistently release games like that one kid who turned all his homework a week late, but that's just how it turned out to be. And I think it's obvious that this impacted the sales globally. It seems Baroque had a good run in Japan though, and who knows, the series might even see a comeback in Japan, like what we're seeing with Tokyo Extreme Racer. And it honestly gives me hope that we'll see a lot more of these obscure Japanese gems in the future finally making it to Burger Town. Now, why was the series more popular in Japan anyway? Well, I think it comes down to a couple of reasons, but respecting the year that the game was first released in the US in 2008, I don't think the world was really ready for a lot of the things that this game was trying to represent. First of all, anime was not nearly as mainstream as it is now. There's also the fact that the game had a lot of Christian imagery and themes of a false god. I imagine not a lot of mothers were comfortable buying this game for their kids, and considering the game only released on a dead console and a Wii, I don't imagine many teenagers and adults were buying this game either. We of course also have to remember that the game reviewed poorly due to mechanics that weren't understood by critics at the time. Personally, I'm surprised the series didn't die sooner, but that still doesn't make me any less sad to know that our pal Baroque is gone. As a viewer, if you've never played Baroque before, you're probably just imagining this game isn't all that much fun. I mean, so far I haven't really had many nice things to say about it, but let's change that up. Because even though Baroque definitely kinda sucks, there's still a lot of charm here to be found by the kinds of people who really like video games. What made so many people fall in love with Baroque and its strange gameplay, cast of characters, and world?
Celebration of life.
Welcome to the Celebration of Life. We hold this celebration as a way to honor the memories of the deceased. I knew Baroque. She was a good game. And even if she kinda sucked sometimes, she had this cool mechanic called bleed, and a ton of indie games these days have bleed, but she had it at a time where no one else did. Critics didn't understand her. Here you basically have two health bars, vitality and hit points. Hit points are obviously dealt by enemies, and once it hits 0, you die. But vitality is a bit different. It's dealt by time. Once your vitality hits 0, time will start dealing hit points. This might make the IGN review make a bit more sense, but the reviewer treated this mechanic like a time restriction, when it's really no different from your average hunger mechanic. And you can heal both hit points and vitality with certain items, and you can even upgrade their capacity if you use a consumable when your bar is full. This adds a whole new layer of skills to the upgrading system, forcing the player to manage their resources efficiently. Oh, I almost forgot. Vitality also heals you when it goes down. Kinda like the hunger bar in Minecraft, but with healing items being semi-rare, how do you keep your vitality from hitting 0? Two simple ways. One, we gotta go fast. I mean, if you're the kind of person to want to stick around in these dungeons, I think that says more about your survival instincts than the game's design. 2, if an enemy doesn't drop an item, they'll drop a crystal, which you can use to heal your vitality. Now this is where the bleed mechanic really shines, because you're rewarded directly for optimizing your time and killing as many enemies as quick as you can. It's like the Binding of Isaac meets Post-Void. She was an outcast for more than that though. She was also an endless roguelike, a concept that we all know wasn't popular until indies gave them a second chance. I'm surprised that Baroque doesn't get more credit than other RPGs in this genre. I mean, this was one of the most fleshed out 3D roguelikes of the time, and it seems like no one really cared all that much. Still to this day, it's extremely rare to find anyone mentioning it in video essays covering the history of the genre. God, I sound like a nerd. Anyone who knew Baroque knew that she had a story to tell, even if that story was completely drawn out and very mistranslated. The game's theme of bending Christianity bears a lot of similarities with Evangelion, and it's my kind of theme when it comes to Japanese post-apocalyptic stories that involve gods. Obviously, it's purposeful blasphemy for the sake of being edgy. It's not so original, and I'm not going to pretend that the story is anything groundbreaking. I'm also just going to say it outright. The game's plot is really strange, confusing, and not very relatable. Even when it appears like there's some sort of religious or government criticism written in the stories, it just turns out to be an excuse for whatever's going on. I can understand that some people didn't connect with this game because of that flaw. But with that being said, it's Kino. Like, it's bad in all the good ways. It's so bad that you almost like it, you know what I mean? But as far as fulfillment goes, you literally feel more fulfilled with Y2K's original ending than this one. So, how bad can it be? Well, there's basically a religious agency called Archangel that tried to understand a being that they referred to as the absolute God with an experiment that ended in a hellish climate change for Earth that disfigured all humans and brought some monsters into our world. The only way to fix this now broken world is by getting in the last floor of this structure called the Neuro Tower. This is because the absolute God is there. We don't know who made the Neuro Tower or really what it is, and we don't know what this absolute God looks like or if we're supposed to kill it or even just let it do its magic. And that, my friends, is because we're dealing with a silent amnesiac protagonist and a confusingly vague guy who tells us some vague stuff called the Archangel. Normally, I'm not too fond of protagonists having amnesia since, in my opinion, it's an easy cop-out for the story for them to not have to explain original concepts to you. But here it's presented kind of differently. The game takes place in the mind of an amnesiac who's in a simulation, so they keep their memories of each time they enter, which allows us to unravel the story and world each run. But I gotta say, the story in this game matters just about as much as it does in Doom. Most of what will grab your attention in this game are the gameplay and the visuals. But that's not to say that there's nothing here with the story, and there definitely is stuff to uncover for all the types who like to look in all the nooks and crannies of an RPG. So I'm not going to spoil anything here, but I will say, don't get your hopes up for some type of avant-garde Evangelion type ending here. You will be sincerely disappointed. The floor-to-floor dungeon crawling combat is broken up with the occasional simple puzzle and some environmental traps that you can set up or disable. There are also some breakable walls that you'd expect from your contemporary action RPG. Similar to The Binding of Isaac, most items have random effects, and some of those effects could be such an unlucky pairing, it could end your run. Thus, you can pick up these parasites, and they will appraise your items, giving them the exact description of what they do. These parasites can also sometimes have a binding effect that you can apply to an item or yourself. There are also other ways to appraise items, but I feel like I'd be spoiling a main mechanic if I told you how. There are also item boxes called indefinites, granting the player with a new item or an explosion costing them some health. There are also these items called torturers, which are usually just some sort of status effect that's unleashed onto the current room. They're basically magic summons, or another item that you usually see in The Binding of Isaac, like cards. Also similar to The Binding of Isaac, when you exit a room to the next floor, you have to remember to prepare for the next floor, resulting in a scavenging period before the descent. But unlike The Binding of Isaac, we have a time limit, which I think greatly increases the feeling of risk and reward during this phase for each floor. You could leave now and be prepared enough, or the next floor could overwhelm you if you don't try to find some stronger weapon. Or maybe you do try to find something better and you end up finding a strong weapon for the next floor, but you end up getting killed off by one of the enemies. It's this quick decision making that just makes the game all the more fun. The creature designs in this game are great, and even though there's no dodge or block, the combat remains engaging once you get used to it. This is mostly owed to the fact that attack patterns are extremely easy to memorize and identify. Instead of blocking or dodging, you just either shuffle to the side or step back. Now I want to harken back to that IGN review because if you remember, they complained about this. But if they were playing the game the way it was intended to be played, they'd quickly realize that there's no need for a dodge or a block. Baroque had many friends. Some of them were pretty disturbing, and some of them could have been Tumblr sexy men, but one of them stood out, goddammit. Allow me to introduce to you my favorite NPCs. Of course, first up, there's Mr. Archangel. He's pretty much your average attractive, mysterious, red-eyed, light-haired angel guy. He's pretty cool and quote-unquote mysterious, but I mean, come on. Just looking at this guy, you can tell that he has some fucked up involvement in a plot twist later. Sentry is the first NPC I even spoke to when I played this game. He doesn't really have a lot going on for him other than the fact that he's clearly a part of the Archangel's organization. There's just something about his appearance though that I really like. The giant buster sword, completely glazed over white eyes, and his giant stature. It makes me think of some of the human characters from Berserk. Next, I'd like to show our friend the Crooked Man. Wait, nope, it's Longneck. Longneck. Jokes aside, this is definitely one of the hardest character designs to look at, because it just looks like it really hurts to be this guy. That being said, this exposed spine is metal as f***. I love this design. Bagged One is the next in the list, and that doesn't look very comfortable either. Her cool little quirk is that she has a photographic memory and only speaks from things that she's heard from others, never thinking for herself. The next one on the list is probably my favorite concept by far for this game. This is Horned Girl, and she reads the thoughts of other people around her. Normally that would mean nothing, but she also spouts these things out loud. This is a really cool way for the devs to let the silent protagonist kind of speak. She also says some pretty insightful things that the player may miss as well, but any more and I'll start spoiling things. Now I can talk about my absolute favorite character in this game, goddammit. Meet Coffin Man. He's the tutorial guy in this game, and since game guides are practically non-existent for Baroque, he's basically responsible for making this video possible. But that doesn't excuse him of his sin. From the moment you speak to this man, to his last words, he will find some way to squeeze the word goddammit into it. With some further context, it seems like this was some sort of translation error, but nope. That's just this guy's thing. He says goddammit all the time. So here's a quick compilation of every time that he says goddammit in the entire game.
Goddammit, goddamn, goddammit, goddamn, goddamn, goddammit, goddammit, goddamn, goddammit, goddammit, goddamn, goddammit, goddamn, goddammit, goddamn, goddamn, goddammit, goddammit, goddamn, goddammit, goddammit, goddammit.
Well, that was something, right? Anyways, something else I can't help but mention is this line in the manga where he tells the player that the Horned Girl is always saying lewd things when he's around, and there's even a reference in the remake.
You shouldn't get near horny over there. She's creepy. She's always saying indecent things.
So yeah, bro's a gooner. The next NPC I want to talk about is integral to the story, the Collector. Basically, at the end of every dungeon run, you have this option to throw one item into the void. This will be transferred to the Collector. He works as a chest of sorts, allowing you to bring items from previous runs into the current run. In late game, this allows you to make custom builds, and something that the IGN reviewer really didn't note, and I think it's because he didn't know you could even do this. The Collector isn't mentioned once in his entire review. Anyways, he's got a cool design that kinda reminds me of a cross between the merchant from RE4 and the little shit that follows around Guts and Berserk. And honestly, if that little snot rag had a voice, I'd think he'd sound like this.
Please don't cause me any pain right now. I haven't picked up any of your items.
As we all know, in this cruel world, nothing lasts forever. But these memories will always be with us, until our time comes. Baroque didn't live a long life, or a full one of that matter, but it lived, I guess.
Resurrection.
So, Baroque has seen two major releases, the Saturn/PS1 version and the PS2/Wii version. If you're looking to play the original, you have a couple of options. Obviously, being a Japanese game only, it needs a translation patch. Thankfully, ROM hacker and translator Pliskin has covered us for this translation patch for both the PS1 and Saturn versions. Unfortunately, I can't link them because they've been taken down. So you'll have to find them on your own, but it really isn't that hard with the help of Google. If you're playing on real hardware with the CRT, the Saturn version is much better, since the texture mapping is much more stable, but the transparency is dithered, thus the requirement of a CRT. If you're emulating, you'll probably have an easier time with the PlayStation 1 version, as most modern emulators can get rid of those texture warping flaws. Some people prefer this look though, so play however you feel. Just note that this game is not compatible with the popular emulator DuckStation, so you'll need to use another emulator like Mednafen or PCSX Rearmed, which both have full compatibility for this game. As good as the original Baroque is, if you're playing this game in the modern era, you're probably more interested in the remake. Like most multi-plat games that make it to the PS2, I gotta say, avoid the PS2 version. I mean, if you have a PS2 and you find a good copy for a good price, go ahead, but considering Wii collecting is cheap as hell, it shouldn't be tough for you to find a copy on the Wii. From there, you could simply play it on a real Wii or a Wii U if you have one. But if you want to play on an emulator, of course, Dolphin is your way to go. Again, you can get an authentic and accurate experience with these emulators, but I know a lot of people would rather play at 4K, so here's what that looks like. Unfortunately, the game's UI doesn't scale well at high resolutions, a common problem for emulation. There's also a really blurry, low-resolution film grain effect that I'm pretty sure anyone would rather do without. So, in either the description or the pinned comment of this video, I have left a link to download a texture pack that I've made. This texture pack gets rid of the film grain effect in Dolphin. Just download the zip and dump all the files into your Dolphin user folder, just like any other texture pack. Well, it's getting that time in the video. Closure is weird, because you kind of have to find it within yourself. This game is never going to come back, and if it does, it's going to need some serious changes. Who knows, maybe this video will introduce a whole new generation of roguelike players, as IGN put it, and there will be more demand for something like a project like this, at least in the indie space. And even if that doesn't happen, it's still clear with games like The Binding of Isaac, Enter the Gungeon, and Cult of the Lamb that roguelike action RPGs with a dark theme are nowhere close to dead. Thanks for watching my trash videos and bearing with my disgusting personality. It's always a pleasure to complain on the internet about trivial gaming subjects, so I encourage you to join the discussion. If you know any game series that's long dead and you feel like its death was unfair, let me know about it in the comments. I read all my comments, even if I don't respond to all of them. So who knows, you might just get the displeasure of being responsible for my next future disaster. And now's the time where I get a little emotional. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. We're at 10K now, and I'd like to take this time to announce to you that I'll be streaming soon. I've been preparing for this change for a while, and it's kind of the main reason why I've been gone for so long. I will be focusing my future content on graveyard gaming videos like this, and more game reviews. I might do some more Minecraft content in between, but I'm not sure. Anyways, I need lots of footage for these videos, and I gotta play them to completion for a fair review, of course. Thus, I will be streaming my gameplay in the future, and your insults in chat might even make it to my videos if it's funny enough. I also want to announce a goal. Once we hit 20K, I'll be opening a Discord server. This will be an open server, but that being said, it'll be work safe, and a server for discussing gaming and gaming only. I've realized a lot of my viewers only know who I am from my videos, so this should serve as a way for me to kind of get to know you guys a little better, and vice versa when I start streaming. So, let's smash that 20K goal. But that's all I got. So, as always, peace and love from the grave, and I'll haunt you in the next one.